So today what we're going to do is do a video lecture first on motivation. That'll take about 20 minutes. Then while that's going, take some notes. We'll use those for some exercises. After a quick review, we'll talk about in more detail, again, exercise number 1, which is a workshop design, take about 10 more minutes maximum. And then second exercise is actually going to website, getting logged on, registered as a free service, and then going through a sportsmanship course. That'll take about 30 minutes tops. So when we're done reviewing everything, basically you're looking at 1 hour total. As my good friend Joe Nauman likes to say, this is just too easy, so let's get started. First off, with motivation, when you're starting, there's kind of 2 keys to the whole thing. And the questions that you've got to really ask yourself: are they ready to learn? And do they want to learn? And the motivation kind of is the key to learning. And as we talked earlier, readiness is real important. We talked about the importance of your athletes being ready from a skill standpoint, but also now we're looking at from a motivational standpoint. But the second thing is obviously when you've got athletes that want to learn to become better, now you've got some highly motivated individuals. So some questions that you need to ask yourself or answer with motivation also as coaches: why are some so motivated, and why are some, how do we get them to be the best they want to be? So how are some motivated and how others unmotivated, and how do we get them to be the best they can be? So keys to motivation. People are motivated to, first off, to fill some of their basic needs. And when we understand what those needs are, we can do a better job of taking care of them. You want to think about from your own experiences. Some young people, it's going to be just being on the team. Some people, it's going to be individually to excel. Sometimes it's for the team to excel and have success. So if we understand what those are, we can do a better job with them. Secondly, sports psychologists have learned that the 2 most important needs, though, are having fun and a feel of worth. Okay? It's kind of crazy, but that's how simple it gets. So we worked on previously you designing your rewards punishment type system to motivate people. Think of the goals you talked about there, the types, and why, and kind of the steps you implemented with that program that you can use for your portfolio. And those are what we call concrete examples. When we start to look at the foundation of program design of your rewards and so forth, we talked about this earlier, but extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, simple, those external motivations. Some examples of that is when I was coaching at the last place, we actually use kind of like the Ohio State Buckeyes, the helmet stickers that are familiar. And I worked with programs who didn't. Basically, players got stickers for individual achievements and team achievements and so forth. I found it to be incredibly motivating. It was fun, a positive environment. So again, it kind of fit our style at the time there. Intrinsically, obviously, is just having that desire to compete individually, and that motivates you. But most importantly here is a need just to have fun, and we forget that quite often. Is most of the time, if we're enjoying what we're doing, then we're motivated to keep working hard at it. An example of that would be, I did this in college. I've done it with the 9th graders, but at the end of the work days during a practice and so forth, before we start the taper, our conditioning that we did at the end was actually a game of tag. And it's nothing more enjoyable watching people work really hard but having fun while they're doing it, just like you were little kids on the playground. So those are some ways to do some of those things. Now, how do we get to that point? We want to talk about this, hopefully most of you experienced, but the flow experience. What is it? Have you ever felt it? Hopefully you have in sport, because it's one of those feelings where everything's just going right. And your senses are really heightened, but the game seems to move slow motion, and you really don't have to think about what you're doing. You're able to be purely enjoying it. So your concentration is kind of automatic with things. So this in itself, the flow experience, and this is why a lot of people do that. It's one of the reasons some people get this with running, I know, sometimes as a stress reliever, but just the enjoyment and the high, runner's high. It's intrinsically rewarding. Another way to look at it is if you just look at, and this was in the textbook, looking at a way to achieve peak performance is again, it's real important that we find that medium, not too low, not too high, but performance, usually peak performance comes when we're right at a balance of all of that. So, big thing is how do you create flow for your athletes? And the number one principle here is making sure that you match the challenge of the task to the ability of the athletes. What that means, real simple, is setting up not only practice situations, but hopefully preparing them so well for competition that they are in a situation where they always have a chance to be very successful. This right there guarantees you the opportunity to have a very highly motivated group. Think about it also with, again, back to that play type thing. When I talked about tag as a way to do conditioning, the one thing about being on the playground, if we go back and remember as kids, is if you were in a situation that you didn't match up very well, you weren't enjoying what you were doing, or you weren't challenged enough, you were bored, you left and went to a different task. And that's the beauty about free play. So that naturally happens for us. We need to create that as coaches. The last thing to think about, and Peg, who's going to come and talk to us more on legal issues here, is we have a legal duty, and this is a term, the duty to match our athletes, to a safe environment, safe competition as they're going through. So some ways to create that flow, teaching mechanics, simple. Keep practice stimulating. I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but we forget to do that sometimes. I know I do, where you get into the drill, into the teaching, into the focus of getting certain things done before you get into a competition. You forget to actually keep the practices stimulating. One way to do that, and we'll talk about this more with teaching methodologies, is to not go too long with a drill or a period and make sure you create differences or creativity within the routines that you establish, all right? Another way to do it is to have the athletes actually design some of the drills or make small changes to it. I've done that even from youth kids at camps all the way to college. That's really helpful because, again, now they're involved. You've empowered them. You've enabled them to be part of the process. Another one is keeping everyone active. This seems like a no-brainer again, but if you've ever done sport camps working with young kids or recreational summer activities, if you're not keeping them moving, it's just a total recipe for disaster. So one of the things we'll talk about, very important when we do your actually skills and drills and teaching, is you design them so that there's a constant flow and movement. And that really gets down to a balance of drills and games. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but you try to mix that up. Avoid constant instruction. One of the things that I found as I got older, when I was young, I thought I needed to talk a lot, give a lot of feedback, and that established me as a good coach. And as you get more confident and more experienced, you'll see that the timeliness and the impact of what you say is more important than the amount that you do. So constant yelling and instruction doesn't really allow much flow. And then if you think about it in a contest, it absolutely takes that away. So one of the things I learned to do, even from my own playing experiences when I thought about it myself, is we work really hard in practice so that when we get into games, there isn't a lot of instruction. So the athletes get a better chance to experience flow. So this is where the first exercise is and first workshop. And you want to take your notes here and bring those to the quiz when we do quiz number 2. And what you're going to do is basically develop a motivation plan of attack. You want to outline the different ways you can proactively motivate your athletes. So go back and use that design system of rewards that you set up as a base. And then from there, what we want to do is separate it specifically into these 3 different seasons. The reason we want to start doing this is for all of your portfolio, you'll have to start examining again for a calendar year. We break up the year into preseason, in-season, plus postseason play, and then your off-season. So look at addressing all 3 when you start to develop kind of a plan of attack from a motivational standpoint. Next, as we've talked about with our TRI, is it's very important to give some illustrations or examples of how you do that. Be creative. You can pull out from past experiences, but this is a chance to be creative and think of new ways to do things. Really design motivational opportunities. Maybe try something different out of your comfort zone. I like to call it a shopping cart session, meaning you're going to Giant and you're going to fill up your shopping cart with tons of meals instead of just one. So you bring in a lot of different ideas. It's really a brainstorming session. And then last, remember and go back to those keys of motivation we talked about, kind of the two types. Think about how you can create flow, and then what's the best way to balance that all together. So again, develop a motivational plan of attack, outline some different ways to examine it in the 3 different seasons, and then try to give some illustrations. I'll come back to this and show you at the end of the lecture where you can, on Angel, get to this exercise and list, so if you want to refer to it at a later time. So we're going to move on. We've dealt with the idea of fun, now the need to feel worthy, the second task. And one of the things that we've learned even as young kids is it really wears on our ability, our worth depends on largely on our ability to achieve and be good at things. So in translating to that, what does this mean? We really look at winning equals success and losing equals failure. It's kind of the societal thing. Winning, success, losing, failure then is a state of mind. And that's really what's important to identify here. So emerging from those different success and failures, then we basically get 2 types of athletes. The ones that want to achieve success and ones who want to avoid failure. And if you think about it yourself, whether it's sports, whether it's academics, whether it's just different type of activities, we've probably fallen into both of these throughout, but obviously when we're having fun and we're feeling good about ourselves and confident, we're willing to really go towards achieving success. So, how do successful individuals think? Basically, they look at blaming any insufficiencies on their effort. And the one thing they want to look at then is this motivates them to actually work harder and strive for excellence. So you can see when you're trying to achieve success, you don't fall backwards on the failures as much. You look at those as motivational opportunities. Makes you stronger. Second thing then, if you look at now examining how unsuccessful people think, they look at their failures as a lack of ability or many other reasons. But the main point there then is that they feel they're powerless to change their situation. So a successful person knows they can change, they have the power to change that simply by just looking at effort initially. A person who's unsuccessful or feels that way kind of has that mindset where, hey, I couldn't help it anyway, it's out of my control, I'm just powerless to change that. So how do we want to create some successful thinkers with it? The emphasis needs to go back to your ability to improve and not focus on performance. And that's probably the hardest thing in sport, is that we do keep score. We are based on our performance. But again, if you set up some realistic goals, you set up some reward system that focuses on improvement versus solely on performance, then hopefully you can put the athletes in a position to keep achieving success that way. The second thing then is to increase the probability of flow by matching the challenge of the task to the ability of the athletes. So again, a couple bullet points: realistic goals, personal and team. Use intrinsic rewards to create those or extrinsic rewards to create those intrinsic motivation. Success is not only winning. Think about your initial philosophy and how you communicated that. And then again, going back to that goal setting, the improvement is the key, and making sure you recognize their limitations and set up realistic goals. One last concept for motivation to anxiety is that you need to have the idea of balance. And I'm going to talk about this a lot throughout the course. I really just personally believe that's the key. But if you remember the bell curve, the low and the high being right in the medium is usually the case. The thing that you want to think about, though, is understanding your sport's arousal needs, and they're different for every sport. The example would be, diving, where you've got a lot of fine motor skills involved, lower levels of arousal, so that would be obviously a little lower. When we get into these large muscle movements where the higher levels of arousal are needed, football, for example. So understanding your sport's unique needs, and you can adjust that curve one way or another a little. So just to review, and as I said, this isn't going to take very long, but when we're talking about motivation, number one, are they ready? Do they want to be motivated? Secondly, remember there's 2 needs that that's how we work, that's how we operate as human beings. And it still is to have fun and a feeling of worth. Peg, again, will come in and talk more, but really we have a legal duty to match our athletes to the challenge. And that's really getting into safety, but also if you want to have a motivated athlete, you want to make sure they are matched correctly to the challenges ahead of them. Using a successful mindset, remember, a successful mindset realizes they are in control and have the power to change, and usually it's just through better effort. It starts there. The emphasis on improvement versus performance. It's hard to do in sport, but again, if you go back to your rewards system that you've set up and the things you communicate, and if you do a good job assessing realistically what your limitations, your athlete's limitations are, and what the competition is going to be, then hopefully you can do a better job setting the table for that. Understanding your sports arousal needs. Again, not everything is the same, and as we use those examples, you need to understand what your needs are for your sport and apply those appropriately. Again, balance equals flow, which equals some fun, and then you have an opportunity for excellence in your activity. So remember, exercise 1, you're actually setting up some ideas of the best ways to create flow is really what we're looking at, and it's going to be in those 3 seasons throughout the year. We're going to kind of come full circle with exercise 2, where you go back to sportsmanship, and I'll kind of go through those in detail for you here to finish up, and then again show you where you can find those on Angel for references. So exercise 1, this is exactly what we did. Again, bring it for quiz 2. This should take 5 minutes, kind of like what we've been doing in class. It's really taking notes. You can bring those into the quiz, and then obviously one of the questions will directly apply to this. Again, go to the 3 seasons, preseason, in-season, and off-season, because your portfolio is going to be designed that way. We're going to start to do that. Last, remember the keys and use some of the notes from the lecture here, hopefully, as references. Because again, as we do in the quiz, you'll have your position, but you also have to reference these pieces. Exercise number 2 is really simple, but we're going to use this throughout the course, so this will get us set up for it. You'll go to the website here for NFHS, that's a National Federation of High School Sport, NFHS LEARN, learn, and it's really simple. These are all free situations, but you will get in there to the website, you'll establish an account or register, it's all free. You'll click on courses to the left, upper hand side, and that'll bring down a whole bunch of opportunities. You'll want to go over to the free courses, and there'll be a long list, and towards about 3/4 of the way down, then you'll see sportsmanship, which you'll go ahead and click on there. You'll complete the course. When you complete the course, that takes about 20 minutes. It's a video. You'll go through the process. Then they'll do a 10-point quiz at the end, which you have to pass. You'll go through the process and get opportunities to do that. Once you pass it, and it's very simple, you'll be able to go back to your account and print out the certification, which actually looks like this right here. I just did the other day, so nice little cert there for you. Bring that to the quiz along with your notes from exercise 1, and we'll use the information you gained from the course along with the notes that you've got, along with the readings that are required for that day. Then the quiz is a piece of cake. So, just to review, you've got the lecture assignments now. Exercise 1 and 2, they're both going to apply directly to quiz 2. We will have, before we take the quiz actually, when you come back, we'll have Peg Pennepacker, who's the athletic director down at State High, is going to come in on Tuesday before we take the quiz, talk about legal issues and expand that. Make sure that you come to that, because again, her presentation will be on the quiz there, and should be a piece of cake. All right. If you've got any questions, refer to Angel, and you'll actually see where we'll have lecture assignments on motivation for quiz 2, and that'll draw down these one more time for you. Otherwise, we're all done with our session. Again, you do all of these together. It should take less than an hour. Pretty easy. Be safe out there. Have a great weekend. Bye.